And welcome back into a brand new episode of Tribal Council Chat. As always, we are your hosts. My name is Bruce Heller.
And my name is Brett Parnell.
And let's dive in. So, each of the past couple off seasons we've done, Brett and I have brought you basically any off season since we started the show. Actually, occasionally will do episodes on a specific season, like we did All Stars, or last off season we did Cook Islands. We've also done Gabon, Australia, and so on. And we have another one of those today.
Yeah, we do. We are today talking about Survivor Tocantins, the 18th season of the show.
Yes, I'm very excited for this.
Absolutely same. Probably a season that really changed a lot of how Survivor was played, that gave us some differences in the game. And I would say the cast in this season really moves beyond what we knew and tries to see how they can play their own way. And I really like that about this season.
Completely agree. It's such a fun cast. So, lots of big names come from this season, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we came up with the idea of doing this season for our next season episode, is because probably the biggest character from this season and one of the biggest characters in the history of Survivor is going to be coming back for season 50 next year, who's out playing in Fiji right now.
Yeah, and that is Coach Wade. And this
That's
is
right.
his original season and probably where he's the most coachy. Like, whatever you want to call his personality and persona, it's at its strongest in this season.
Yeah, definitely. And well, it's going to be interesting to see in 50. Does he continue the trend that we've seen later of Coach being less over the top, or is it 50? So he's just going to go right back to this season. Who knows?
Oh, who knows? I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, same. So, Bruce, how do we want to get started with this episode?
I believe you have a layout in front of you, right?
Yes, I do. So I thought this, to start, we will go over the cast and especially characters of the season. I guess we already got into that a bit with Coach, and then continue to move on. I have some other topics as well. Any further information you want to say about Coach? Anything you want to comment on about other big characters in this season? Maybe some smaller characters that don't get as much recognition. Yeah. I mean, overall, top to bottom, going from Carolina to JT, this was a pretty well done job by Lynn and her team way back in the day.
This is a big cast. There's a few people I want to talk about, but I will start with someone you just mentioned, and we'll start with the winner, who's probably you could probably make an argument he's also the biggest name to come from this. If him and Coach are on pretty equal footing, I'd say. And that is JT.
And that definitely is JT. And JT is an interesting character because if we're strictly going to talk about Survivor Tocantins, he plays an almost perfect game.
Yeah. He did play a perfect game, technically.
Yeah. Unanimous vote at the end to win, even though he brought his number one ally to the end, which, I mean, when we look at Taj's exit speech that she makes to the camera and not to the players, probably was a good move on his part, whereas usually players who bring their number one ally to the end, I'm looking at, say, a Colby, end up losing the game because of it, or a Wu.
Yeah.
In this case, JT had it locked, whether he was sitting next to Steven or sitting next to Aaron, and he made the decision to say, Fish and I were on the same tribe, Japalo, from day one. We made a duo on day one, and we're still here on day 39. But then JT had so much else on his resume that he was able to go and get every vote in order to win the game.
For sure. And like JT plays, this is his first of 4 seasons, and like we said, he's one of the most infamous most famous characters in the history of Survivor. Lots of big moments, but this is peak JT. Like this is the
Yeah,
version of JT that is brilliant, plays Survivor's definition of a perfect game, which is no votes against the entire season and unanimous jury vote, which in 48 seasons that has happened twice.
that's right.
So just so incredible socially. You see Fishback deserve votes, I feel like, but looking at the social bonds, how well he gets along with people, in his other seasons, I'd include the social game too. It's easy to see how he got all the votes that he did.
And I think that's the thing is you can't say Fishback should have done it better in either way because JT brought him to the end. But it's not in most seasons Fishback gets votes. But
Yeah.
he ended up on a season where the person who played the best game was just so straightforward that there was no question really behind it.
Yeah, and honestly, like it's one where I would have been satisfied with either winner.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
the reason they're such a good duo, they're one of the best duos in the history of the show, is that you had JT playing the social aspect and keeping relationships, but you also had Steven, who was handling that strategic side, who was
Right.
coming up with the plans. And I think it just comes down to what the jury values. If they play those exact same 2 games with a different jury, maybe the strategic game gets valued more. I don't think either one of them is there without the other one.
Yeah, no question.
So,
And we're gonna talk in later in terms of gameplay, but some of the things that happen in this season that weren't seen before and haven't been seen again because it's that revolutionary, and Steven has a lot to do with that.
yeah, so we're talking about him. Let's kind of just move on from JT to Steven. I love Steven.
Oh, so do I.
He's the strategic brains behind this season, I would say.
Yeah. And I always say he'd be one of the few players, if I was to play, that I would try to really mold my game after.
Yeah. And now we hear him podcasting a lot, which is fantastic. He's super active in the community, which is great.
And he also is able to, even though he doesn't go as far, play a bit more of his own game and not be so tied to JT when he is voted back in for a second chance.
Yeah, it just doesn't go near as well on his own.
Not near as well, but he does still have a decent game.
And they talked about this at the reunion. Steven's game was very focused on Joe, and we won't get into Joe, but was very focused on wanting to get out Joe Anglem. And he talked in the reunion about how it was this white whale sort of thing that he lost to the Golden Boy years ago and didn't want that to happen again. I feel like the JT history almost hindered him a little bit just because it seemed like he was so one-track focused on not losing to that type player again.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that Joe was the same as level player as JT at all, or even close, but no, Steven's fantastic, and I'd love to see him come back. I was hoping to see him on 50, but
I mean, I have a good idea of something that I would just love to see Survivor do.
What?
A season of 20 players sometime down the future. You would have to add 8 men and 10 women to this cast from the original 2 but take it totally out of the hands of the casting department and have Team Sesternino against Team Fishback and let them pick whoever they want to be on their own tribe.
That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Also, would love to see Steven and I have a signed parchment that Steven signed that I won on the Facebook auction, but I would love to see him and Rob Sesternino do Amazing Race.
Yeah, that would be fun.
I would also love to see him and JT do Amazing Race, wherever JT is.
That would also be fun.
So, yeah. Moving forward.
Where I was coming from, you might remember this. But, like, remember when they did the NHL All-Star Game and just let two captains pick their own teams?
Yeah, they did that. They have changed the NHL All-Star Game so many times.
Oh, I know.
It was East versus West, and I was a kid. Then they did the, like, schoolyard captains pick for a while. Then
when you were a kid, it was East versus West. So when I was a kid, it was North American-born players against European-born players.
Just from the time I've been a fan, it's gone from East versus West to players as captain, schoolyard pick, back to East versus West. Now it's this really dumb, like, 3-on-3 tournament by divisions that is my least favorite version that we've had of all of these.
Hopefully the Four Nations just replaces it altogether.
I don't think they're doing Four Nations every year, though.
I know, but they should.
They should, but if it becomes an every year thing, I don't know if it would have the, like, coolness and luster that it had this year.
Fair enough.
But get rid of the dumb, like, divisional teams tournament that's 3-on-3 or whatever it is. I don't like it. But no, yeah, that schoolyard pick for a Survivor cast would be great.
All right. Anything else to add for Stephen before we move on?
No.
Okay, next we have a underestimated player who does a really strong game, I would say, and that's Erin, going out as the final vote.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
She was very strong physically, very strong socially, and clearly was able to work well with the rest of the tribe because, like I was kind of indicating a second ago, but now with Tosh, who we'll talk about right after Erin, when Tosh gets voted out and kind of blindsided by Steven and JT, who she envisioned as being her alliance, she states that if Erin is able to get to the final two, that Erin would get her vote.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
It would have been.
Because Tosh spent the whole game as we talked about JT and Steven as a duo. The two of them plus Tosh were also a pretty tight trio.
Yeah.
So the fact that her going home when she did upset her that much, where she would have voted for Erin over either of the two people she played the whole game with, really surprised me the first time I watched it.
Yeah, exactly. It certainly would have made her an interesting juror in that sort of case. I don't think it would have helped Erin win the game, no matter who she was against, because one thing that we tend to notice in that game is that Erin, even though she's a Timbura member from day one, is closer with the Jalapao Alliance's post-merge, and I don't think that Erin is well respected by, say, like, a coach or Tyson, but who knows?
Yeah. I will say, Tyson grows on me in his future seasons, which I watched at least Heroes versus Villains before I saw Tocantins. I don't like Tyson on Tocantins, and him being voted out before Sierra Reed goes out is one of the most satisfying moments on this show for me.
Agreed, and we're going to get to that pretty shortly.
And we're on the topic of the two of them. Do you want to do Tyson next or Sierra next?
Well, we got to go through Tosh first.
I forgot about Taj. Sorry, you
I
mentioned
mean,
Taj
she's
in
such a
relation
big
to Aaron. I
character.
thought we were wrapping up Aaron still. No, I
Yeah,
love
yeah, we
Taj.
are.
Taj,
Yeah, amazing character in the season. Taj did very well at the game. She and Steven were part of that alliance that I'm going to talk about when we get to like the best moments of the season. Um, Also, someone who is in that category with like other well recognized people to play the game, like Elisa, like Mike.
yeah, for sure.
And to go that far in the game while being a award winning artist is very difficult when people presume that you don't necessarily need the $1 million, both from her extensive music career and her husband's career in the NFL, which we find out about later.
Yeah. And speaking of her husband, her watching a video of him and not realizing the first time until Probst asked Taj what the last thing her husband said was that her husband said "see you at camp" is also one of my favorite moments of
Yeah,
the series.
we're going to get into that for sure when we get to best moments of the season, because that reward has to be one of them.
Yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
So we already went over Coach's game pretty much, and we're going to get to this with one specific episode that is just genius. But anything I guess we'll go next to Tyson and Sierra as kind of two, probably the big rivalry of this season.
I'd say Coach and Sierra was also a big rivalry.
Yeah.
But no, I love Sierra's one of my is definitely my favorite person from this cast of the people that don't come back.
Yeah.
And I like her more than at least two of the people that do come back because I don't like Tyson on this season and I don't like Coach. I don't love Coach on any of his seasons, even though he does provide some entertainment.
I didn't like Tyson on this season with the way he interacted with the rest of his cast. That being said, at the parts of Tyson's game where he's, say, on his own, I do find friggin' hilarious in this season.
Yeah.
So, like, Tyson walking into camp without any clothes on, hilarious. Tyson referring to himself as the assistant coach, hilarious.
Also, at least one interaction that I thought was funny was early on. I forget what it was. He says something that's lying to one of his tribe mates, and they go, "Really?" And he goes, "No, I was lying. You ate it right up." Like they both start laughing. Like just his dry sarcastic sense of humor is funny. We just in Heroes versus Villains, in Blood versus Water, Winners at War, we get more of that from him. And in Tocantins, we don't get as much of that from him as we just get him being rude to people, mostly Sierra. By the way, I looked it up. The last time I did a full ranking of my favorite seasons was in December of 2022. So I think 42 is my most recent season on here. But at the time, and it's probably still true, I had Tocantins as my 10th favorite season.
Nice.
So pretty high up there for me. But I love Sierra. First off, just she comes in at the marooning in the truck, and you can also the marooning has trucks, which is cool. And she says she's sick, and they can tell, and they vote her out at the dumb for. This one's not dumb. They vote her out at first impressions,
and they all think she's going home at this point.
Yeah, and then right after they vote, Probst is like, "Oh, you get to go right to camp." And I love
in a helicopter
between because she gets voted out for voted out, air quotes, if you're not watching on YouTube. But with Sandy, she gets voted out, again, air quotes, from Jalapao. And they handle it so differently. They have the option to either idle hunt or help the tribe and start early on the shelter. And Sandy's bitter and upset and decides to go into, I'm only out for myself the whole time she's there.
Yeah.
And Sierra takes the opportunity to start building the shelter, try to get in her tribe's good graces. And I just love that determination too. I don't like the way Sandy handled that. I love the way Sierra did.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
But for whatever reason,
I always hate like marooning votes, but in this season it redeemed it because they were still playing the game and they just gave them an option to um, determine how best to handle the situation and made them make a strategic decision.
I think the only time they actually went home was Palau, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, went home, yes, but I'm more thinking blood versus water.
And that's I was thinking
Palau, they played they went home, but they still played with the merge game at least for one day of the game.
Yeah.
And then they split them in tribes and voted them out and got the most lopsided tribes ever.
Well, the thing with Blood versus Water is Redemption Island, though. Like, they still have a shot to get back in.
It was just stupid.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying they weren't technically out of the game.
No, I know.
Completely. I forgot about that one. I was thinking of Kagion, where there was another first impressions vote.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, Sierra and Tyson and Coach, the two of them butt heads with her so much. Tyson ends up going home before her, which is fantastic.
Yeah. After Sierra wins immunity at the most needed time for her in a challenge that really evens the playing field between someone of her size and someone of Tyson's.
Now, I will say, Sierra also exposes Coach for lying to Jalapao directly in front of them.
Yeah.
Catches him red-handed, and she gets sent home that episode anyway. And that frustrates me. But I love Sierra. She's a fantastic player.
All right. Before we move to part 2, anyone early on that you think just deserves any mention?
I'll throw Brendan in there for a kind of coming up with the idea that I'm sure we'll talk about of this like secret cross-tribal exile island alliance.
Yeah.
But for also being the dragon.
Yeah.
He was the original dragon in Dragon Slayer that Coach said Brendan is the dragon and I'm going to slay him or something like that.
That he did.
So.
And they started off together as well. But when you're playing with Coach, nothing makes sense.
No.
I would do that. I'm also just can't go through this season looking at this cast list without talking about a couple of other things from players that didn't make the merge. One is Spencer. I think at this point, Spencer is the first new high school graduate to play the game.
Yeah.
And there'd only be a couple more, him, Julia, I think 2 other people.
I think that Spencer was with Todd for a while.
Oh, really?
Don't quote me on that, but
interesting.
I thought I heard him say something along those lines.
Probably.
Also, because you mentioned Carolina as the first boot, shout out to her for being part of probably the most awkward reunion scene.
Yeah, you said exactly what I was just about to say.
With Redemption Island, and she was dating David Murphy at the time, who's
and not her fault at all.
And I swear she's mouthing the word "shut it down."
She is.
But she says yes, and they invite her on stage for the rest of it anyway.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the conversation on the car ride home from there.
I can imagine what I said during the season, during that when we were watching it live, which was, yes, because I'm sure you remember David Murphy's speech at Final Tribal Council just a few minutes before it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm like, wow, this guy not only campaigned for him, but he's trying so hard to be Boston Rob.
That's funny. Very true also, but that's funny.
Yeah. Okay, so we already kind of hinted at it, but let's get into the strategy and gameplay of this season. And I think the first thing we have to talk about, you've mentioned it so far, is the Exile Island Alliance. That's really the game defining move of this season that we really never have seen again. At least, I mean, we've seen some cross tribal play in Heroes versus Villains, which obviously blew up in a certain JT's face. And I think at this point, no one will really want to try that type of thing again in Survivor.
Yeah, I agree.
Even though Journeys in the new era set up perfectly for these sort of events, no one does it except for when Banu is begging for people to let him stay who can't even vote him out.
Oh, Banu. What a great draft pick somebody made first overall there. What a legendary.
Kevin and I won't let you live that draft down.
Do what?
Kevin and I won't let you live that draft down.
I make fun of myself for it, too. He looked so good on paper, though.
He did.
But, yeah, I wanted to...
You know what I mean? How many of these cross-tribal alliances could we get at Journeys if people were willing to be a bit more risky in the new era? Although the new era is full of so many force risks that I am not surprised why they aren't.
Yeah. I watched this season in either 2020 or 2021 the first time, and I wanted this alliance. I knew JT won and Steven was second. That's all I knew. I wanted to see this alliance take off so freaking bad.
Yeah.
So, and they build a really good foundation for it. They're really smart with their Exile Island selections to make sure those people go that they're building that alliance with. It just kind of never takes off at the merge for whatever reason.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but shout out to Brendan and Taj for putting their minds together and thinking of that and building a secret alliance through Exile Island. That could have been huge.
Yeah, could have. If it works out, it's absolute genius and could win them the game when you hit the merge and nobody knows that people are already working together from days ago.
For sure. It just, never took off, unfortunately, but the promise was there. So,
any other big moves you want to talk about?
Yeah, a couple. Let's get into voting.
I figured I should have said anyone you want to talk about next.
Yeah. Keeping Coach, even though he was just proven right in front of you that he lied to you.
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
I guess the only thing I could think of is kind of like what I was talking about in my 50 analysis. And that's that at this point, if you're keeping Coach around, are they potentially seeing Coach as someone who can't win the game?
I think it might have been just admittedly saying this as a fan of hers. Sierra was a bit of a wild card.
Yeah.
Whereas Coach, they kind of knew how to manipulate and get him to go with them.
Right.
So from that perspective, it makes sense. But
from where I'm going here, and I don't remember Debbie enough to know, but I'll ask you this from the other six. If it's a final two between Sierra and Coach, who wins?
I don't think Coach beats anyone that was left.
Exactly. That's the point I was getting at. I was just going to go through them one name at a time. Sierra beats Coach. Taj beats Coach. Aaron beats Coach. Fish beats Coach. JT beats Coach.
But JT and Steven were always planning to sit at final two together. So
yeah, but they might not be able to control it the whole way.
I don't think crossed their mind because they never planned on him being at final two.
No, I know, but I'm saying that makes a great person to have around because if you can't control it, either you're going to final two together or you're going to final two against the guy you're going to beat.
Fair enough. That makes sense. Also,
could you imagine? I mean, I guess we did get to see it later, but at that point, he already had the experience of being on Survivor and still didn't win against Sophie Clark. Can you imagine this version of Coach having to do Final Tribal Council, talking all about dreams and dragon slayers and Native American tribes?
Well, I think we kind of got that a little bit with his Exile Island trip.
Yeah, and I have a segment on that coming up.
Which is just the most, pure, coachiness in its purest, most dangerous form is that Exile Island scene.
Yeah.
And the challenge immediately following after.
Yeah. We'll get to that.
Oh, yeah. He needs a walking stick at some point.
Yeah.
But now, keeping him over Sierra, it makes sense in a certain way. It just is frustrating as a fan.
Yeah, I agree.
What else do we have?
Taj getting voted off by Steven and JT.
Yeah, that kind of surprised me.
Same. I think that's a huge strategic move, though, too, because if there was somebody who was going to get to the end by winning final immunity and beat Steven or JT, it would have been Taj.
Yeah.
So I think it's a move that they had to make. It's a very strategic move, but JT is lucky in a way that we see him sitting next to Steven because of what we see Taj say at the end. Taj in this spot almost reminds me of Rafe.
Yeah.
That says seemingly in public is okay with getting voted out, but then once she gets into that confessional, she is not happy.
No.
And we saw the same thing in Guatemala, where it's like Rafe says to Danny, do whatever you want to do. And then the second that Jeff snuffs his torch, he's immediately wants to vote for Stephanie because he's not in the final two.
To be fair to Rafe, him and Steph were each other's top allies.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Danny really ever had his vote.
No, I don't think so, but it's just how public he was about it without even getting to final and listening to the final two.
Yeah.
You could tell that he didn't really mean what he said at that challenge.
Yeah. Guatemala had great challenges, by the way.
Oh, it's so good. Great challenges, great location, amazing history around there.
I need to rewatch
Speaking of this, since I just mentioned location, I've got to kind of throw in this line while we're talking about Tocantins. I mean, Brazil is one of the top 5 largest countries in the world, along with the US, Canada, China, and Russia. So it's not a surprise that it is geographically diverse, but every time I watch this season and I see these mountains and these big piles of sand that Exile Island is on, I'm just like, how is this in the same country as Amazon?
That's wild. I forgot.
It is.
No, and I was going to say, Tocantins Exile Island is just a desert, basically. It's wild. It's just sand for as far as you can see, sand dunes, blaring sun. It's wild.
Yeah, it sure is. And I mean, that's the way that landmass is. There's little streams and such that keep enough water coming through to sustain life, but that's it, as we see in the season.
Yeah.
All right, any other game moves you make before we go on to part 3?
Nothing comes to mind.
All right, so part 3, favorite moments of the season.
Um, I mentioned Tyson going home being super satisfying. Taj not hearing that her husband's video ended with "See you at camp," then realizing it when Probst points it out.
I
Is
gotta talk about that reward in Taj's video because when he says "see you at camp," my mind went right to watching JT here, and I'm like, would JT trade his own loved one visit in order to meet Eddie George at camp? Because I think so.
I don't know. He might. I'm gonna go
I'm like,
with no, but
I'm like watching that. I'm like, I don't know JT. I don't know whether it what it was, but he's from Alabama. I'm like, this guy has to be a Tennessee fan or an Ohio State fan.
yeah.
Probably Tennessee, seeing that he's from Alabama, where if you're anyone but a Crimson Tide or an Auburn fan, it's kind of odd.
How do you know he's not one of those two things?
What?
How do you know he's not one of those two things?
I don't. I said it would be odd if he wasn't.
Oh,
if he cheered for Eddie George in college. I said he's more likely to be a fan of his from the NFL.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because I'm sure there's lots of people in Alabama who cheer for Tennessee in the NFL.
Yeah, probably.
That's a neighboring state.
Yeah. But, yeah, the loved ones visit is always a fantastic episode. I love Taj's reaction. Eddie George getting to see how tough Taj is out there on Exile Island is fantastic.
Yeah.
Just an overall great episode, and this season has a great cast. It has a lot of good gameplay. It also has a lot of great character moments like this. We have Debbie being bad at math at the auction. We have Coach on Exile Island. We have so many of these moments.
Yeah. And like even some earlier, we see, like you said, Sierra going from getting voted out and being sick to making the final 7 and really rebounding in the game and taking Tyson out. And playing that advantage that she has through the helicopter ride so perfectly, whereas odds are with Sierra being not well, if she doesn't get voted out and she does have to make that hike, she probably gets voted out first or second in the game.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she could have done that.
I agree.
But with the advantage, she's able to say, hey, I'm here to work for Timbira. I'm not just playing for myself, and gain some respect from the tribe while not having to appear weak.
Totally agree. And it's a brilliant move.
It is.
One that Sandy could have taken advantage of, but decided to be bitter about it. So
yeah. Though Sierra and Sandy are also in very different points in the game. The lady in her 50s generally just in Survivor always gets voted out early, so
yeah,
at least until the new era, which they obviously didn't know of back then. So you can't blame her for trying to get some self-protection.
Yeah.
I mean, they never got to see Julia Sue 20 years ago.
But no, Sandy wasn't in a good position, but she didn't do herself any favors either.
Yeah.
So I think she probably could have helped her position a little bit if she had come at it with the mindset Sierra did, but she was just so upset about being voted out at first impressions that kind of clouded everything.
Agreed. Any other moves you want to bring up?
No, nothing's coming to mind.
All right, so let's talk about probably the most recognized episode of the season and maybe one of the most recognized episodes of Survivor, and that's the Martyr Approach.
Yeah.
I'll say the first thing. This episode should have got an Emmy Award. Just the episode, not the whole season, not for reality programming, just for like editing.
It's
This
so
is
good.
amazing. And the way that they do it too, I'm always like, and you might know that I'm curious to know if you have this sense or if it was just me watching it, especially considering your profession. But I'm like, are they editing it to make Coach telling the Easter story of Jesus?
I don't think
because it sure felt that way to me.
I don't know that that's where they were going, but like I said, his exile island trip is just Coach in his purest form, like the purest form of Coach, and he's spouting all his like stories and philosophies and whatever you want to call it. He ends up with a walking stick at some point. Shows up to the challenge after his exile island trip with his back hunched over for some reason. Just Coach gone wild.
Claiming he's having asthma attacks.
It's ridiculous. It's Coach gone wild in the funniest way possible.
And it's Coach just fighting for every last second in the game before he finally gives way. And once Coach drops out of that challenge, where you're just balancing on those two couple millimeter pegs, we've concluded the story of Coach that season.
Yeah. And then
until he shows up with Ozzy in a totally different part of the world.
Yeah. Well, even before he shows up with Ozzy, we see him and Tyson on a tribe together again in Samoa.
Yeah, true.
Where he gets upset about being ostracized, and Tyson tells him, "Don't wear feathers in your hair and don't do the Tai Chi in front of people," or something along those lines. Something about his stories also.
Yeah.
Basically, just stop being so Coach, I think, is what Tyson was trying to say.
Exactly. And then me speaking of religious references that may or may not be in Tocantins. If that wasn't religiously enough for Coach, we get to South Pacific, where he's a cult leader that everyone is following except for Sophie, but she's pretending to follow his religion so that way she can take over.
Yeah. I will say, South Pacific, I've called it a bit underrated of a season before, but I don't hate Brandon Hance on this season. Now, I hate the way he is and the way he operates towards Michaela. That's kind of weird. But, like, Brandon Hance gets remembered for the meltdown on his second season, and understandably, deservedly so. But he's not terrible his first season. He's not as unlikable as either his second season or his uncle is.
Yeah.
He gave up an immunity necklace, which was stupid, but
yeah,
his Eric had already happened at that point, so
exactly.
But no, the Coach episode is just, you know how like distilled water is like the purest form of water, there's nothing in it. This episode is distilled Coach. It's just wild. It just gets more and more.
I think you just said the episode title.
Okay. Are we going back? Okay, because like half of our season episodes we've given funny names to, and like the Cook Islands one in Australian Outback, we just said like the Cook Islands episode. So I wasn't sure how we were naming this, but like,
well, you've just decided that we're gonna name it.
This whole like Coach gone wild, distilled, whatever you want to call it, it's fantastic. I still don't know that I remember or know where the walking stick comes from, but at some point on Exile Island, he has this giant tree branch he's walking with.
Yeah, he must have picked it up while climbing the sand dune or something.
It's a desert and a sand dune. There's not.
Yeah, but
I don't remember
there's
there being
trees
trees
along.
in sight.
Oh, there's trees all at the bottom of them. There's just sand dunes like mountains all throughout the environment.
Okay, it seemed way more deserty than I guess it was. But
Yeah, it's probably just the helicopter shots and stuff.
which
This was before they could use drones and get air footage all day.
which by the way, walking with that walking stick on Exile Island completely fine. Then shows up to the challenge with his back hunched over like he's a question mark. But
Yeah. But hey, he went to Exile Island and said he wasn't going to eat food for the whole game and have no water and so on and so forth. That'll do it.
Yeah, it got to his brain. I guess
Yeah,
maybe he was just hallucinating the whole time. That would explain a lot, actually.
that would.
So, what's next on our list?
Next on our list is the end result of the game. And I mean, we've already pretty much gone over this, but perfect game from JT, one of the very few.
One of two perfect games, I believe. But I will say, this final tribal was a battle, dude.
Yeah,
And I
it
think
was.
the biggest mistake Steven made was admitting that he had considered not taking JT had he won Final Three immunity.
I agree.
Is JT really played that up and played the oh well I never considered taking anyone other than you like loyalty I'm so hurt thing. But I think JT wins with or without that. But that kind of misstep by Fish really clinched it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree completely with you, especially what I want to say, especially on this season, because all we get, especially from one character more than anything, is this honor and integrity. It's like Joe on steroids.
Yeah.
And for my season 48 reference, but Coach was so far into that you can almost tell as the game's going on that whether Coach's approach to the game is real or just a complete fraud, it's influencing everybody around him because they're putting up with this act for so long.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I do agree with you that was his one big mistake. Also, gotta say, when we mentioned that there was only two perfect games, still how disappointed I am in Tawana's vote in Pearl Islands. There should have been three.
You could argue Jeremy.
Yeah.
The only votes he received technically didn't count.
True.
So I would argue he still got them and the other two didn't get votes, but technically speaking, you could count Jeremy and 31 if you wanted to. I just wouldn't, even though I love Jeremy.
Yeah. But still, just going back to my point from Pearl Islands, how does anybody that's not named Johnny Fairplay decide they're going to vote for Lil over Sandra?
I wouldn't even say anyone that's not fair play. Just how does anyone?
I agree, but if anyone was going to do that, I would have expected it to be Fairplay, and even Fairplay voted for Sandra.
Yeah, I don't know. Gosh, that's wild.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, JT and Steven are such a great duo, but also I think they've both proven neither one of them works near as well without the other one.
That's true.
JT has come back two more times, I believe. Steven came back once, and neither one was able to come even close to replicating the results of when they were together.
Very true.
They're both kind of half the game when they're together. They have both halves.
Right.
So one of the great duos of all time, for sure.
Absolutely.
So Yeah, what else do we have?
Align blindside first boot unless there's anything you want to mention.
Nope. Go right ahead.
Okay, just 2 seconds. All right, so considering that there's two of them on this season, I am going to give you the names of Survivor players that are married to professional athletes.
Nice.
So from Tocantins, you have Taj Johnson George and Aaron Lobdell. And let's just throw in from another season someone that we've talked a lot about and people are sad isn't on 50, Elizabeth Hasselbeck.
Nice. I am going to align with Elizabeth probably. I'm gonna first boot Taj, unfortunately. I love Taj. I can't go to the end with her or I lose. And I can't blindside her because then she's mad at me and doesn't vote for me. So,
Yeah,
and that leaves me to blindside Aaron. And who is Aaron married to?
I can get that name. David Moss, who played for Calgary and Arizona
Oh, nice. Go
in the
Coyotes.
NHL.
Even though the
A
Coyotes
team
are,
that doesn't exist anymore.
well, they're the Mammoth now. I still called them the Coyotes this past season because Hockey Club is a stupid name. So
Fair enough.
I also just hate relocation in sports. So I don't like that they moved, but oh
In
well.
fact, I've heard that there was a time because of his spot in hockey that right after Tocantins, Aaron was actually living in Alberta, Canada.
Nice. So, like we said, Tocantins is a season with a lot of big names, some legends of the show. I'm giving
Yep.
you three one-time players from this season.
Nice.
You have these are people we talked about on this episode a little bit. You've got Sierra Reed, who's one of my favorites from the season.
Yep.
You've got Carolina, who we didn't see much of, but we talked about her a little bit this episode. And I will, for the third one, throw in there someone we did not talk about and say Sydney Wheeler for the third name.
Interesting. I am going to align with Sydney. We did not talk about her, but she just missed the merge after being in an alliance with the younger players and just couldn't get the numbers against some of the bigger characters in this season.
Yeah.
I'm going to blindside Sierra. I think that she was an excellent player in all elements of this game, did get voted out because of the issues that she had with coach and with Tyson at some point, but was able to outlast Tyson. Probably a very good ally. And that leads me to make Carolina as Francesca 2.0.
Yeah. I am going to align.
For those of you who don't get that, I'm referring to being a first boot 2 times.
Yeah. I am going to align with Sierra. And for a couple reasons, I think she's a stronger player than she got credit for. But she definitely, like, based on this season, seems to have the ability to rub people the wrong way. So I think I could beat her in a jury vote. I don't remember Sydney a ton. So I'm going to first boot her for the unknown, and I'm going to blindside Carolina because that's the only one left.
Nice.
Okay, this was a fun episode.
Yeah, this was a fun episode. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, be sure to check out all the Reality Realm stuff, all our shows, Redbubble store.
And from what I hear, we're only about a week away from the start of Australia versus the world. So once we can find that content, we'll start talking about it.
Yep. And with that being said, grab your torches and head back to camp. Bye, everyone.
Good night.